This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 20th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Donald Trump securing a commanding lead in the Iowa caucuses, Rishi Sunak seeing off a revolt from right-wing Tory MPs over his Rwanda plan, and Beef, The Bear and Succession scooping the big prizes at the 75th Emmy Awards. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team is Harriet Marsden and Sorcha Bradley, and from the Week magazine, it's assistant editor Leif Arbuthnot. And we've been having the coldest temperatures in 14 years. Have you all been keeping warm?
No, I've been swimming, so I've been getting cold.
Outdoor swimming?
Yeah.
Wow.
Chilly.
That's impressive. Do you need to wear special ice-breaking devices at this time of year?
Yeah, it's quite nice because there is ice, so you can only go, you can't actually swim that far because it's literally physically impossible to get beyond the bit that's solid.
Sorcha, I imagine you just simply haven't left the flat.
Oh, absolutely. I've got the central heating cranked up, so I'm very toasty right now.
Yeah, I'm on Team Sorcha. Harriet, it's you kicking us off this week. What do you think the week should be remembered for?
Is workplace wellness doing more harm than good?
A successful corporate wellness program can transform the health and productivity of your employees, leading to a happier and more engaged workforce. Start by conducting health assessments to understand the unique needs of your employees. This can include biometric screenings, health risk assessments, and surveys.
Well, I feel better already. That was the video Components of Corporate Wellness Programs from the YouTube channel Waliba this week. Harriet, what's the story?
So a new market research report came out that showed the global corporate wellness industry was worth $53 billion last year. That's up from $8 billion in 2016, and it's expected to increase rapidly again this year. So as we heard in the video, corporate wellness covers mostly health risk assessment, but quite a significant chunk goes on employee well-being. So initiatives to support mental health, things like stress management training, mindfulness seminars, sleep apps, things like that. These are formally recommended in British workplaces, but last week, a big study on British companies came out to show that most of these initiatives are actually having no benefit. Most of the people in the study from the Wellbeing Research Centre at Oxford University found that people who use their company's mental health benefits didn't feel any better, and stress management courses actually appeared to have a negative effect overall. Interestingly, the only exception to this was volunteering or charity work.
Okay. Leif, why do you think if these kinds of plans don't appear to work, they're on the rise?
I think it's a question of companies wanting to keep up with each other. Even companies that sort of talk a big talk about not being interested in sort of woke culture. I'm thinking about newspapers like the Daily Telegraph will advertise jobs that sort of boast of their mental health support and their kind of cuddly workplace. So I think it's become a bit of an arms race between companies and that companies increasingly feel that if they aren't offering something on mental well-being, mental health, they aren't going to attract really good candidates.
But then what they're offering, Sorcha, is often so kind of tokenistic and or cheap. I mean, it's a corporate subscription to Calm. I mean, if I wanted to I could take out my own subscription to Calm and it costs, £5 a month or something. It's not really an incentive to go and work for someone.
No, exactly. I think these things are often just sort of corporate sticking plasters, maybe for wider organisational or structural issues. I think, if you're unhappy at work or very stressed, often that's for real tangible reasons. Maybe you've got a high workload, maybe you're being undermanaged or overmanaged, maybe you don't feel like you're being paid fairly. Those are real reasons. Being given a subscription to a mindfulness app isn't going to address those problems at all. So I'm not surprised to hear that these things don't really work.
So maybe the findings of that survey aren't surprising, Harriet, but they're based on prior data. So, if the industry is rising, maybe it's also maturing. Maybe the well-being industry in the workplace will get better.
Well, it's interesting because the study author, William Fleming, he's actually said that the findings are incredibly controversial and they do run counter to previous studies. Now, there was a big study last year which looked at workers before and after the pandemic, so over a duration of time, rather than the Oxford study, which was just at one single point in time and took in employee responses. The study that came out last year looked at American companies which used a platform called Spring Health, which wasn't, like you were saying, a sort of a tokenistic subscription to Calm. Rather, it was a platform that connected people to legitimate outside external mental health services like therapy. And that had a really significant impact on employee well-being. They found employees reported reduced symptoms of depression and anxiety. And from a company return on investment perspective, productivity was higher and fewer missed days. So there's conflicting evidence, but there is also quite a substantial difference in the offerings. Like as Leif was saying, it is a bit of an arms race now with companies to attract good candidates. And also particularly in America, so North America has the biggest market share of this. There are actually tax breaks for companies that have these kinds of benefits. And also there are cost-benefit analysis considerations that we don't have in Britain, like they're trying to reduce insurance premiums and healthcare costs as well. So it's a different picture between Britain and the US, but in Britain in particular, as Sorcha was saying, these individual-led approaches, they're not organizational change, so they don't actually address the core issues that might be causing significantly increased stress, which is things like longer working hours, higher workload, lower pay compared with inflation. Like these are all things that an on-site yoga course doesn't help with, but the on-site yoga courses did help with things like back injuries, like physical health. So that it's a bigger picture and it's more nuanced than just they do or they don't work.
Yeah, I mean, Leif, if you're an employer listening to this, of course you can understand, if you just pay your employees more, they'll be happier. Don't bother with any of this stuff. But that does cost more. So I suppose, you can be cynical about it, but at the same time, if you've only got a small amount of budget and you actually can't pay everyone more, but you can do some things like be more flexible about working from home or give people free meals or mental well-being, it's still worth looking into, no?
Yeah, it might be worth looking into. At the week, we have a fruit basket that comes on Mondays, and people go crazy for it. It's not that good.
An infamous fruit basket.
It's absolutely terrible.
The fruit basket is so bad that when I bit into a pear, I chipped my tooth and I had to go to the dentist. So, and I sometimes wonder whether that fruit basket is causing more harm than good, because people get stressed when it hasn't arrived, and then there's a weird sort of run for it when it actually arrives. And all I can think is that it's been put there as a part of broader scheme to make the workplace feel more homely and foster common feeling between the different parts of the of the floor where we all work. But I'm pretty skeptical about it. So worth talking about with this study that Harriet's brought up. It wasn't looking at specific practices such as counselling to address specific mental illness, and I think that's quite an important one. I once had counselling in a previous job for insomnia, and that was extremely effective because it was extremely expensive counselling that I would have had real trouble affording otherwise. It was CBT, and I had 10 sessions, and I wouldn't have ever thought to get CBT otherwise, probably, and it really helped. So I think sometimes...
Thanks for sharing that. To what extent was that problem, though, caused by your employer?
I would say basically 100% caused by the job.
Sort of, I guess, again, from the employer's point of view, you're possibly sort of talking them out of a lawsuit, aren't you? They're helping you rather than getting in the way.
Yeah, and I think that rather than, it's one of those things where rather than address the actual underlying causes of the insomnia, it's much easier to sort of send someone off, to a counsellor. But at the same time, the tools that I picked up on that course of CBT serve me now, and I don't even work for the employer that gave me the CBT. So I think it's worth saying that when someone has a specific problem and the employer is willing to put actual substantial quantities of money behind it, because each of these sessions must have cost at least 150 quid. It can be really helpful for employees.
Sorcha.
Oh, well, I was just thinking that where I have enjoyed sort of what would maybe be termed sort of workplace well-being activities, that is sort of stuff like, a choir or a running club, sort of places where you are fostering community, you're talking to your fellow colleagues, you're learning more about them, and that in turn makes sort of your working life much easier. It makes things run more smoothly. You feel much more included in the team. So I think as Leif was saying, there are some things that do clearly have real benefits, such as paying for counselling, and also there are also like really effective things that do go on in terms of workplace well-being. But I think those are often more of the things that foster community, which I think especially kind of in this post-pandemic world, in the world of work, we've been really lacking that. And that's the sort of thing that I imagine, to me anyway, I would enjoy more, find more useful than, things that you're doing alone at home on an app.
Yes, well, that face-to-face interaction, Harriet, is maybe what you were getting at earlier when you singled out volunteering as the thing that appears to be beneficial.
Yeah, see, I thought that's what the most interesting takeaway from the study was. There have been a lot of previous research to show that people, like a major source of contentment or joy is this kind of giving back, like volunteering or charity work, particularly in communities, and particularly with communities less fortunate than yourself, which can foster a real sense of gratitude. And people feel worthwhile. People feel like they have value, that they've had an impact when they can really see that they have actually helped people often less fortunate than themselves. That is true not just in the workplace, but kind of just across the board as well. But I think it's worth just differentiating between workplace wellness schemes, like you were saying, the subscription to Calm or like things like that, and when they connect you to external platforms that provide CBT and mindfulness and therapy, because there is an overwhelming body of evidence to show that mindfulness and CBT are very effective and do promote well-being generally. But as Leif was saying, a lot of the problems could also be traced back to organizational issues in the company anyway. But the main aspect of this that I think that we haven't really touched on is the substantial difference before and after the pandemic in terms of spending. And that is largely not related to anxiety and depression and stress. That's largely related to chronic illness. Like, we're talking about severe long-term health conditions. And in those cases, a workplace wellness scheme is not even a sticking plaster. It's not going to do anything.
But also possibly, Leif, in those cases really isn't much to do with the employer. I mean, that is a trauma that the whole world was put through. And to what extent should we be expecting employers to pick up the pieces there?
Well, exactly, and also to do with NHS waiting lists, and companies can't really account for the problems in the health service. I was thinking, as Harriet and Sorcha were speaking, that I think one of the best things that companies can do for their employees' well-being is put money behind a bar when people go out for drinks. I think that's an undervalued way of fostering team spirit.
If you just let the fruit basket ferment.
I mean,
that's very true.
We had to pay for our own team Christmas party.
Yeah, exactly. Well, right, and actually, on the print side of things, the editor. I think they might get help from further up. I don't know, but the editor I know puts a lot of money behind the bar, which is extremely generous of her.
You had it here first, but it is spread out. You're sure?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. I think that's a way of fostering sort of team spirit.
I guess the thing is, though, in the UK. And this is a very typically British response, we might be wanting more money behind the bar. But in the United States, which we were talking about earlier, it's not just about mental health care that comes through your work, is it? It is all healthcare. They don't have an NHS. And so people really are looking to their employer, Sorcha, to make sure that they're covered for all their health needs.
Yeah, I think that is sort of the interesting difference to think about in the US. I think providing these sort of workplace wellness programs, whether that's yoga classes, fitness classes, and sort of mental health care, that is a way of reducing healthcare related costs, maybe insurance premiums as well. So those things can actually, that will make a real difference to employees in the US. 92% of US companies have some sort of wellness program, and that might be more after the pandemic. So it is something that they're thinking a lot about in the US for those reasons.
And where do you see those statistics going, Harriet, given the two things you've presented us with here? The fact that it is rising rapidly as a phenomenon, but also being shown not to work. Do you think we are going to see more of it? Or do you think we may have reached peak corporate wellness?
Well, I mean, not at all, actually. I think that the market, the value of it is expected to grow most rapidly in the off-site segment. So virtual stuff, that's growing just enormously. And particularly in Asia and India, we're going to see a lot more growth as well. Like, we certainly haven't reached peak global corporate wellness in Asia and in the Indo-Pacific. But what Sorcha said about these bringing down healthcare costs and insurance premiums being beneficial to the employees, it's actually much more beneficial to the employer. Like, not to be too cynical, but the employers are not putting money behind this unless they're getting a on-the-line ROI. Like, they want to see that they have saved money overall, because they want to see that they're getting better candidates. They want to see that they're getting lower premiums, lower costs. So this is not necessarily to do with employee well-being as much as it is to do with your own bottom line and your retention stats, and as Leif was saying, how you look to the outside world. But the thing that I thought we haven't talked about that I think was really interesting was when some of these stress management programs ended up having a negative effect on how people felt. I thought that was fascinating, and this professor of work, health and well-being was interviewed with the New York Times about this, and he said that these health interventions, they might send the message that if you do these programs and you don't feel better, it must be your fault, or that people might internalize this failure. I've tried all these initiatives and I'm still stressed and I still feel terrible. I must be at fault. And I think that was really interesting as well. And I think that's something that employers should really, really look out for.
Okay. Sorcha, you're up next after this. This week's episode is supported by Investec Wealth and Investment UK. Are you one of millions being dragged into paying more tax? Will inflation deflate your future lifestyle? Know where life can take you with Investec Wealth and Investment UK. They can make sure you're making the most of all your allowances and reliefs with tailored solutions designed to make your money grow and a plan to help you pass it on. It pays to get advice. Discover how you can achieve financial freedom faster. Search Investec Wealth and Investment UK. It's important to remember with investments that your capital is at risk.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is navigating today for a brighter tomorrow. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Righto, Sorcha, over to you. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Why is Wales's brightest young rugby star about to touch down in America?
Why now? Why have you made that decision?
I think it's just the nature of the time, and it's the international player pathways in January, and it just so happens obviously the Six Nations in February, and I think now's the perfect time with my age and having to pick up a new sport. I think it's nothing about rugby, but it's about my ambition to make my dream come true and play in the National Football League.
Louis Rees-Zammit talking to Gloucester Rugby TV on Tuesday. Sorcha, who is he and what's the story?
Yes, he's a 22-year-old Welsh rugby star who has now quit professional rugby and is heading to the United States for a chance to play American football in the National Football League, which is better known as the NFL. So he's flying to Florida this week to become part of what is known as the International Player Pathway, which is a relatively new program designed to give an opportunity for elite foreign-born athletes to play in the NFL. And this has come as quite a big shock in the world of rugby union, because Rhys-Zammit is a huge star. He's very talented. He's played for Wales 31 times. He's played for the Lions, and his contract is with his team Gloucester is about to come up in the summer, and he's already had a lot of sort of lucrative deals and offers on the table, including one in Japan. But of course, this kind of salaries that you can get in rugby is nowhere near about what you could potentially earn in the NFL, where star players are earning tens of millions a year.
Yes, and from that point of view, Leif, it's no different, is it, to American football players? I was just choosing my words carefully because we mean American football to mean the NFL, but what I mean is people who play soccer in the States coming over to play Premier League football here. You'd expect that to happen. If they're a good football player, they'd come to the UK. It's just that, isn't it? If you're good at chucking yourself into scrums, then maybe you'd be good at American football. Maybe it's not a surprise, and we might see more of it.
We might see more of it. We've also seen quite a lot of it already, or some of it already. And unfortunately, it hasn't really gone that well for rugby players who've gone over and tried to make it in the NFL. None of them have made much of an impact. And I wish Louis the best. But if he makes it work, he'll be basically really distinguishing himself where others have failed. Partly because as much as there are lots of similarities between rugby and American football, they're basically the same game historically, but have diverged over time. They are different games, and a lot of people who, even if you've grown up watching NFL, you probably haven't grown up playing it if you live in Wales or in England, and so it's going to be really difficult to adjust.
How different are the two sports, Harriet?
I mean, they're pretty different. I can't pretend to be an expert on either, to be honest. But like Leif was mentioning, he's not the first to do this. I mean, Christian Wade, who was an England winger, he left the Wasps in 2018 to join this IPP pathway. And despite signing reserve contracts a few times, he never actually played a regular season NFL game. And he was cut in 2022, and now he's returned to rugby, age 32. But he said that he made the mistake that he was trying to take the ball like he was catching a rugby ball. He mentioned that the intensity of the training is just a completely different level. He said it's just go, go, go all the time. I think it's substantially different enough to present challenges, although the player that Sorcha has mentioned, Rhys-Zammit, he has a 5-year head start. He's a lot younger. But I would say that they're certainly different enough in terms of the intensity, the training and the skill to present kind of unique challenges to any athlete who's trying to make that transition.
I mean, just watching the Super Bowl on telly occasionally, Sorcha, I'd say the difference is the stop-start of the thing, right? Like, it's got the same intensity when they're playing, but they only seem to be playing half the time.
Yes, well, I think that this is something that a lot of people who make the transition into the NFL from rugby really struggle with. There's a lot of plays, and there's thousands of different potential plays in American football, and these all seem to happen in sort of a split second. So it isn't necessarily the athleticism that is kind of like a barrier to success in the NFL. It's actually the mental aspect of the game, the speed of the game, the sheer amount of knowledge that other players have. I think particularly, I'm not an expert in American football, but my partner is from America and very into it. And from the time you're in high school, you're playing at quite an elite level. If you're good in high school, you'll go to college where they're basically playing at sub-elite level. College football is televised in America. These players are huge stars from the time they're teenagers, and if you're good enough, you can go on into the NFL. So the level that you're playing at for a sustained number of years is, you're playing at this elite level for over 10 years, and that's something that's very hard to come in and replicate. If Rhys-Zammit he's already 22. Actually, he's coming into the game at a late stage for his age, where some people will have been playing this game since they were 7 or 8 years old, or even younger.
Yeah, so he doesn't really have a head start, does he, Leif? He may be younger than the last Brit that tried this, but there are other kids he's playing against with 20 years in the bag.
Yeah, absolutely. You do wonder whether it's also to do with, I don't know, wanting sponsorship deals and all the stuff that comes around American football. Maybe he thinks he could just make a lot more money there. I note that he's got a girlfriend who's very supportive of him, so it might be a broader, wish to actually just changes the scene a bit. But I don't know. I think that it's a loss to rugby, and yeah, I slightly worry about people throwing their futures away with rugby in the hope that of kind of chasing after the NFL dream when it's actually extremely difficult to pull off.
Yeah, I saw some interesting comments on this story, Harriet. I think it was on the Times website, where people were saying, well, this isn't a surprise because the last decent video game about rugby was, and then they said whatever this title of this video game was, from like 2008. And they were making the comparison with FIFA and the kind of industry that there is around all of that, and saying that really rugby union hasn't stepped up in terms of glamorising itself and making its appeal, particularly to young men that they want to come and join them and play for them, clear. And actually the NFL is a threat for that talent pool.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a piece on this back in 2022 about the rising appeal of the NFL in Britain, and it is becoming this huge, wildly popular game in the UK over the last decade, and that's to do with the rise of social media connecting fandoms across the pond, international broadcasting deals. So Sky Sports now has a broadcasting deal so you can watch things on catch up and not have to worry about the time difference. The first regular season NFL game held outside of North America was actually in Wembley in 2007, and since then Wembley's hosted NFL games every year, and millions and millions of fans in the UK tune in for Super Bowl Sunday every year, and they love the pageantry of it and the length as well. You can really make kind of a whole session of it. The stop and start isn't unattractive to a lot of people, like cricket isn't either. The sort of the culture and the merchandise, these are all very attractive. And also I think the real difference between the NFL and rugby union for fans in the UK in particular is it's not the same teams winning it every year in the NFL. Any team can have a shot, and teams can bounce back from at the absolute bottom of the league to the best the next year. It's anyone's game in a way that rugby union really isn't.
And that's partly because the NFL put so much money into it, isn't it, Sorcha? And they're pushing, aren't they, expansion into the rest of the world. They want to be here.
Yeah, partly I think the NFL is good at renewing itself for reasons that Harriet was just saying. The first draft pick, so generally the best college football player, is put into the worst team in the NFL. It's put into the lowest team in the NFL, and that gives them the opportunity to build up the team, give them a shot at redemption, and it makes the game incredibly interesting and incredibly exciting. But as you say, a huge amount of money is put into it. It's incredibly lucrative. It's watched by tens of millions in the US and tens of millions of people here as well. I think 14 million people watched the Super Bowl in the UK last year.
I don't think that's actually right. I think 14 million people think that they say that they like the NFL or something, but I find 14 million just an absurd figure.
Well, that could be the figure of people that are watching Bruno Mars or Katy Perry on Twitter the next day as well, couldn't
Maybe.
it? I mean, the Super Bowl is this huge showbiz extravaganza.
Yeah, a lot of people do tune in just for the halftime show. I mean, the latest research, they estimate that it's about 14 million people who describe themselves as fans of the NFL in general.
Yeah, because the Football World Cup will be watched by something like 17 million if you're lucky, and maybe the, Strictly at its peak will have 9 million.
Yeah, but look at this complacency, Leaf. You're the problem. You're rugby union here, aren't you? You're not awake to the threat.
I'm neither.
Do you think, Sorcha, that people in rugby union do need to be paying more attention to, I was about to say brain drain, it's not really brain drain, is it? Whatever the equivalent rhyming phrase would be.
Game drain?
There we go, for the forthcoming game drain.
I think it's difficult to say because, as we were just discussing, actually most UK British rugby players who have gone on to the international players pathway haven't been particularly successful. Maybe Rhys Sammet will be the person who bucks that trend and then sort of opens the floodgates to more rugby players and more elite athletes going over to the NFL. I was reading somewhere even Harry Kane was saying he was considering a career in the NFL after his football career is over as a kicker. It's a much less physical role, so therefore he actually has more of a chance of sort of getting to that type of role. But I do think the glamour of the NFL, it's hard to say no to. And if you're looking around as a young, quite talented player and you're thinking, can't really make much money doing what I'm doing right now, but if I give this 1 in a million shot, maybe I'll earn the big bucks, then, I can see the appeal of that massively.
He already has American teeth as well, doesn't he, Lee Summit?
He does look American.
Shining and white and stunning. Don't know what they're going to look like when he comes back.
Sorcha's right, though. It's the glamour, isn't it? I mean, Taylor Swift goes to NFL matches and rugby has Princess Anne. Like, it's not...
Don't be mean about Princess Anne. She's a wonderful lady.
She was the Taylor Swift of her generation. Okay, Lee, you're finishing the show after this. Okay, Leaf, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Are siblings depressing?
Why are you looking at me? I'm not looking at you. I'm looking out the window. Stop staring at me. I can literally see you looking at me. I'm literally not even staring at you. I'm looking outside of your window. You have your own window. Stop touching me! Well, you started this!
Arguing in the car with your sibling, a sketch posted to YouTube by Amy Woe a couple of years ago. Leaf, what's the story?
So a study has come out in the Journal of Family Issues that's looked at data from more than 18,000 teenagers in China and the US. And it's found that the more siblings an adolescent has, the more likely they are to be depressed and anxious and to have low self-esteem.
And they think that's caused by what?
Well, they are quite careful to say that it's not clear why this is, but there's a theory known as resource dilution, a hypothesis known as resource dilution, which is essentially that posits that parental resources are finite, and the more children there are, the less the children get of these resources. And so the idea is that if you're at the bottom of the pile, for instance, you might have less one-on-one time with your parent helping you with your homework. Maybe there's more kind of competitional energy at home. But it's going against some other studies that suggest different things about the benefits of having siblings. So it's quite a complicated picture.
Well, exactly. I wonder if even the benefits are necessarily, in contradiction with these drawbacks, Harriet. I mean, it sort of speaks to my own experience. I'm an only child, but seeing my friends, that, they hated their brothers and sisters when they were teenagers, but now they're in their 30s and 40s. They've mostly got a good relationship, or they're grateful for the support. It's both, isn't it?
Yeah, I have to be really careful what I say on this in case any members of my family are listening. But no, I think it's fascinating because I'm one of 3. So I kind of see that there are some very, very, very intense downsides and intense benefits. I mean, in the study, for example, it showed that children with more siblings seem to have better social skills. They're less likely to get divorced. The theory being that the sibling relationship being very intense and very long term gives you a lot more practice for negotiating kind of conflict. And the thing with siblings is it's the only relationship in your life that you just can't get away from. It's the longest relationship of your life. But of course, the downsides, like Leaf discussed, is this idea of resource dilution. When I first read this story, though, my initial response was, well, this must be kind of a correlation thing. Generally larger families kind of more likely to be a lower socioeconomic families, more deprived. That was my first response. And obviously the research can't prove that it's siblings that are having this effect. But the decline in mental health was shown to be stronger if siblings were closer in age. So that kind of seems more likely to give way to the idea of resource dilution. But I think also when you say that you're an only child, it is also worth noting that being an only child, there are a lot of studies that show that there are benefits to parents of having just one child. So I think that's another side of this picture, that we can also look at how it affects parents having multiple children.
I mean, I definitely think that as a parent of 2 children now, Sorcha, I'm glad we had the second, and I love him for the record. But it does mean that the first one has less of my attention. It's probably growing up a bit slower in some ways, certainly academically, and in terms of, the stuff he gets to do as a treat, because we've got a younger one hanging around. And you sort of just hope there's a trade-off, and, they learn other skills along the way. There's obviously positives and negatives to both being an only child and having siblings.
Yeah, definitely. And there is this sort of idea that birth order can have this huge effect on your personality and how you relate to people. The eldest child, they get attention, so a lot of their parents' attention. So they are more confident, more outgoing, have leadership skills. The middle child is kind of generally said to be more of a peacekeeper. Youngest child maybe lacks confidence because they kind of get the least amount of time, and parents sort of over having children by then. How much truth there is, I couldn't really say.
I mean, my younger one's by far the most confident because he's just had to get on with it because we've been ignoring him all the time.
Poor little thing.
The idea of, is it raised by wolves?
Yeah.
Like by the time you get to like 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever, at that point the parents just wash their hands of it.
Yeah.
So, Leaf, what do we do with this information anyway, even if it is true? Even if we could absolutely evidence that this latest report is accurate, and that, if you have siblings for teenagers, they're going to hate each other and be more depressed. It's not going to stop families doing it, is it?
No, and actually the author of the study says that parents should not, or prospective parents shouldn't, base their fertility decisions around the conclusions of the study. And he also says, so basically, don't stop having kids if you've read the study and don't want to, have stressed out 13-year-olds. He also says that a much bigger effect on children's anxiety and sense of self-esteem, low self-esteem, is whether they are living with their biological parents, both of them, in the same house. That has kind of 4 times bigger an effect than whether you have siblings. So I think it's worth bearing in mind that whilst in the sort of field it's called sibship, while the size of sibship has an impact on an individual child's well-being, there are bigger factors at play. I also, just picking up on Sorcha's point, the idea of birth order has been something that's been in the culture for hundreds of years, but also there's really patchy evidence to suggest that where you come in the order determines kind of your personality. But there was a study that was quite interesting of 500,000 people, sent out lots of questionnaires, and it found that birth order contributes to about 4.1% variation between personalities, and that older children are more likely to have an assertive personality and high self-esteem, but be moody and tense, and the youngest are more likely to make people laugh and be extroverts. Middle children have the most agreeable traits, apparently, but are least likely to be assertive or talkative. So that was one study, but then for every study that says there is something to the birth order theory, there seem to be other studies saying no, there isn't. So it's quite difficult to make your way through this marshland. But if you want to believe it, there are studies to back it up. I mean, also very specifically, not only should we be ignoring this study in terms of planning our children, Harriet, we should be proactively procreating, right? Because birth rates in the West are falling. That's what we're being told. We need more people with siblings. Well, I wasn't making a proposition to you.
I mean, I've heard the way you talk about your children, Ollie. So, absolutely. The declining birth rate is a real, and it's increasingly probably one of the biggest threats to humanity. It's the replacement rate. You have to have, they think, it's roughly 2.3 children per woman to kind of perpetuate a population, and we are significantly below that in most Western countries. We are extravagantly below it in places like France, that came out last week. Italy, South Korea is the worst. Sweden, Denmark, Norway. This is a big worldwide problem. It has huge implications for caring for an aging population and supporting a workforce, like massive implications across the board. But just to go back to the birth order theory, which I am a huge subscriber to. Now, Leaf is right to say that there is a lot of conflicting studies about this, but just from my vibes-based opinion, is it is 100% accurate that the order that you're born in, if you're in a multiple sibling household, makes a huge difference to how you are. And I think as well, gender really intersects with that as well. There's a very famous now social media trope called the eldest daughter syndrome, where it's kind of explaining that no matter where you come in the birth order, if you are the oldest daughter, there are certain traits that are now it's cliche, it's stereotypical, but certain traits like being kind of overprotective, being very much more on it, kind of trying to care for everyone's well-being, tending to be quite a lot more stressed, taking on quite a lot more of a caring role. So that intersects with gender and society, and it's not just birth order. But then, of course, there's, the youngest child who's typically kind of under-policed and spoiled sometimes. I'm a middle child as well, so I'm not saying anything bad about my little sister, but I will say as a middle child and as the oldest daughter, I do see a lot of truth in a lot of this, because you have this very weird, you have this very weird identity thing where you're not the oldest child. There is one older than you that's bossed you around and slapped you around and generally taught you your place. But then you are also expected to be taking on a slightly more caring role for the youngest child as well. So that can be very confusing. But when you were saying earlier about how it changes throughout your life, when you get past this adolescent stage of your siblings making your life hell and stealing your clothes and generally your resources and your parental attention, when you get to your 30s and 40s and 50s and you're coping with the challenges of caring for your aging parents, which is, as we said, the declining birth rate is going to be increasingly an issue, to have someone to share that burden with that's been there for your whole life, and more than anyone you will ever meet, whether that's a partner or a best friend, your sibling more than anyone will understand where you're from and who you are and why that is. And having that person or those people to help share the burden of caring for aging parents is priceless.
Yes. And Sorcha, I suppose just the life experience of having criticism and having arguments is important. You know, otherwise you could get to your 30s without anyone ever having called you an arsehole. Suddenly it's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually a twin, so I have a slightly, I was going to say unique sibling experience, but it's somewhat unique. Yeah, the amount of competition between us when, you know, you're younger is absolutely insane. It's mad, especially which is, you know, I think twins get compared to each other a lot more.
It's like the conversation you have about them, right? When you meet them.
No, yeah, exactly. It's like, what ways are you the same? What ways are you different? And your differences and your similarities are sort of really highlighted amongst your family, amongst your friendship group. So that can be quite tough, but at the same time, as you say, you know, if you have your arguments with your twin sister, in my case twin sister, you do have to resolve it, you do have to find a way through, you do have to sort of negotiate and learn to get on, and those are incredibly useful life skills to have. And you know, ultimately it also, I think, just personally speaking, it gives me quite a lot of security in my life. Like, you know, you have a built-in like best friend, you have someone who like has your back.
Is she an identical twin?
No.
That must be like arguing with yourself when that happens.
Yeah. No. We actually barely look related, which I think that has been actually a positive in terms of we didn't get compared too much.
Leif, this was your choice of your story of the week. Why? I mean, what are the implications from this, do you think?
I think the implications are that as we get older and our population gets older and people have fewer children, there may be some benefits to this. And obviously the falling population is a real headache for governments and things. But perhaps for 13-year-olds, it won't be quite as bad as all that.
Well, as I said, I'm an only child, but in so many ways, you're my family. So thank you for being there for me. That's it for this edition of The Week Unwrapped. I said in so many ways. I'm not in all the ways. My thanks to Harriet, Leif and Sorcha. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription at theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.